Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History YouTube channel. And it's exam time. It's that time of year again, and I want to do a few videos that focus on avoiding common pitfalls in a couple of topic areas. So let's talk with the old favourite. Let's talk about Nazi Germany, which is what probably a large number of students will be studying. I'm going to move on to others throughout this series. And talk about a couple of kind of old chestnuts, really, that people tend to churn out in Nazi Germany essays that will only ever guarantee them low or average marks. Okay, let's talk about one that people love to talk about: propaganda and the power of propaganda. Firstly, the Nazis were thought about the way in which they communicated with the population as more than simply just propaganda. They did use that term; it was part of Goebbels' job description. But what they thought about it was that they referred to it as culture, about not just simply sending a message to the German people about militarism or anti-Semitism or whatever, but about changing the culture of German people so that they embraced a more classical or traditional militaristic masculinist version of what it meant to be German. And you can see this in the kinds of artists and architects and sculptures and musicians that were Hitler was a kind of a patron to, Arno Breker, for example, in terms of culture. But the extent to which propaganda and culture worked is debatable. Debatable because, as we know, and you can test this out on any human being you meet here in the 21st century, is that people are not simply sponges for ideas. People do not simply, unless they are over the age of about 4 or 5, uncritically take on board anything that is said to them. They have already come to Nazism by 1933 with pre-existing assumptions, presumptions, beliefs, ideas. Some of the Nazi voters are emphatically anti-Semitic and absolutely convinced of much of what Hitler says. Others are not. Others simply think, well, it's him or the communists. Others simply think somebody has to do something about the economic crisis, and democratic parties have failed to do so. Others just think, well, let's keep our head down and get through. This is what Ian Kershaw calls the muddled majority, the kind of the shades of grey in the middle, the kinds of people who react in a relatively normal way to abnormal circumstances. Let's just try to make the best of this. The idea that Germans march past a propaganda poster on their way to work and suddenly they are full of genocidal thoughts by the time they get to work, or that they listen to a radio broadcast and think, yes, let's gas 6 million Jews. This doesn't happen. There was perhaps nobody in 1933 other than a kind of a small core of regime fanatics that was thinking about genocide. People rarely do. Genocides actually, if you look at them throughout the 20th century, tend not to happen in quite that way. They tend not to sort of be these fixed intents. They kind of emerge through a series of historical processes, unpleasant ones. So propaganda is a very, very subtle and complex and nuanced area. And the first thing to say in one of your essays is that it's important to not be overly simplistic about the power and the extent and the scope of propaganda. Certainly, over time, it appears to work, and Kristallnacht, for example, would be evidence of that. However, there were wide areas where it doesn't, where people are unreceptive to it, or people carry on regardless. Hitler's aim of creating this Volksgemeinschaft, where all people are mobilised in the interests of the racial community, doesn't happen. People, by the end of the 1930s, by and large, there's a whole generation of Germans who are actually disengaged from politics, who are switched off from it and are more apathetic. The dictatorship has made people more politically apathetic than they were in 1933. Anyway, I'll come along to one of these other issues on the next video. Anyway, remember to subscribe down below, and if you've got any comments to add, it'd be great to hear them, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.